There is so many amazing miniatures games out there, all with a little bit of something different to suit everyone's tastes. Just because you're not into maybe the big ones doesn't mean the smaller ones don't have something that can really pull you in. That's why I'm here today to give you my 5 favourite game mechanics in miniature wargames. Number 1, Malifaux, the Fate deck. So if you're not aware, Malifaux by Weird Games does not use dice, which is quite unusual for a miniatures game. It uses a deck of cards. And this deck of cards is generally a standard 54 card deck. That is your 52 playing cards plus the 2 jokers. However, Malifaux chooses its own suits to represent the clubs and the hearts and the diamonds. The 4 suits in Malifaux are tomes, crows, masks and rams. However, this isn't the important part. The important part is that in a normal miniatures game, when you're rolling dice, generally a d6, you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting a 6 every time you roll that dice. And no matter what you rolled the last time, you have exactly the same probability of rolling a 6 the next time. The dice themselves don't have a memory. They don't remember what you rolled the last time. This is where a deck of cards is very different. First up, it means that the scale or the range of numbers that you can have on your stats can vary quite significantly. In a general war game, you would have stats between 1+ to 6+. In a miniatures game that uses a deck of cards, you can generally extend that between 1 and 13. The other side of it is that your deck of cards has a memory. If, for example, in your hand of cards or on your deck of cards, you have turned over 4 sort of 3s in a row, there are no 3s left in the deck anymore. That means you know there are no more 3s coming out. So if you've turned over a lot of low cards, whilst this might not be helping you in the game so far, this is actually increasing the probability that in the future you will turn over a lot of high cards because that's what's left in the deck. Your deck has a memory. It knows what's gone before it and it knows what's coming down the line. And this makes the game very, very deep and very, very interesting. To add to this, Malifaux also gives you a hand of cards, and you can choose to cheat fate and play one of the cards from your hand in place of the card that you flipped over. So for example, if you need a 10 or above for something to actually happen, for something, a trigger to go off, for example, then you can take the card from your hand, which is a 10 or above, and play it in place of that 2 or 3 that you've just flipped over. Imagine a game where you have a handful of 6s that you can choose to put down when you need them. Again, you have to be very careful when you're playing this, because once you've played it, that card has gone from the game until you get to a point where you can reshuffle your deck. So it's about being able to kind of play it at the opportune moment when you really need something to go off. Or maybe you've got that devastating card, that black joker in your hand, for example, which is the worst card in the game. If you've got it in your hand, that is perfect, because it means that it's not in the deck, it's not coming out, and you can play knowing you're never going to get that awful card. I'm really surprised that this 52 card or 54 card deck has not been more utilized in games. It's a fantastic mechanic, and having that memory to the things that you've played, the memory of things that have gone before and things that will come, really changes how you play the game. Number 2 is the draw bag from Bolt Action. Now, for those that don't know, Bolt Action works off an order system, and each character or unit or vehicle has an order dice, and on that order dice are 6 different sides which have the 6 different actions that unit can take. Now, in some games it will be a case of I move all of my models and I shoot with all of my models, and then you move all of your models and you shoot with all of your models. In some games there will be I'll move and shoot with one of my models, and then you move and shoot with one of your models, and then it comes back to me and play goes backwards and forwards. Bolt Action is a little bit different. For every unit you have on the table, you have a dice which goes into a bag, and your opponent has exactly the same, but all of those dice go into that same one bag. Then when it's time to activate a unit or a model, you dip into that bag and blindly draw out one of those dice, and this will determine which player gets to go next. Now, this can mean that when you're drawing them out blindly, that maybe I get to go 2 or 3 times in a row and you haven't had a chance to respond yet. However, what it does mean is it is increasing the probability that next time when we come to draw, there are more of your dice in the bag than there are of mine. And so the likelihood of you getting to go next becomes higher. It's a really interesting mechanic. It kind of stops the little bit of kind of power play of me moving everything and then you having to respond to it. It also stops that double turn type thing that we hear about a lot in AOS, where basically I get to go last in my turn and then I get to go first in the next turn, which means you almost get to not react twice to me, and it adds in a little bit of randomness to who's going to go next. It also means that you can't determine too much, because if I move and shoot with this unit, I'm leaving them exposed potentially for you to go next, as opposed to knowing that I get to move everything else and defend them, for example. Again, it's another one of those mechanics that doesn't really get used elsewhere. I personally think it should get used in more games as well. I just think it brings a really interesting kind of ebb and flow to a game, and that not knowing what's going to happen next and not being able to plan too far ahead, because actually it's in the lap of the dice gods who gets to go next. The third one is Dead Zone with its exploding 8s. Now, Dead Zone isn't the only game that has exploding 8s or exploding dice, but it's the one that I remember it for the most. If you're not aware of what that is, whenever you roll an 8 on an 8-sided dice, you get to roll the dice again. It explodes into another dice. Now, if on that second dice you roll another 8, guess what? You get to roll another dice. And if you roll an 8, guess what? You get to roll another dice. And this goes on forever until you don't roll an 8 again. Now, you might be saying, why would you want to do that? It brings in some very cinematic moments, those David and Goliath moments where someone's big unit is kind of bearing down on the little guy, and that little guy is only maybe rolling 1 or 2 dice to defend himself, and he rolls those 2 dice, and guess what? You roll 2 8s. So you roll another 2 dice, and guess what? You roll 2 more 8s, and all of a sudden that little guy gets to protect himself from the big behemoth beaming down on him. Or even better, maybe you've got that one last model on the board trying to hold on to an objective to win the game, and if only you can take out that big unit. So you roll those couple of dice, and guess what? You get those 2 8s. And then you roll 2 dice, and guess what? You get 2 more 8s. It really does swing the game a little bit, but it's fair for everyone. Everyone gets the chance to roll 8s, and it just really brings in, as I said before, those cinematic moments. There are some games like Dread Ball, for example, which use D6 and also have exploding 6s. However, I think exploding 6s, that 1 in 6 chance that it's going to explode, happens a little bit too often. And I think that the 1 in 8 chance on an 8-sided dice makes the game a little less swingy. However, we can't deny when you go on that 8 train, it's a great feeling. Number 4 is Marvel Crisis Protocol and its dice pool versus stat changes. Now again, Marvel Crisis Protocol isn't the only game that does this. A lot of Mantic games do this, but we've just talked about a Mantic game, so I thought I'd talk about a different one. So what do I mean about a dice pool? In some games, to affect how strong a particular weapon is, or maybe to show that there's been an upgrade, or maybe to show how effective someone else's armor is, we start to move stats around. So instead of hitting on a 4+, maybe we improve that and we hit on a 3+. Or maybe if we're too far away, that comes down to a 5+. Now with games using a dice pool, we keep the stats static all of the time. The stats never change, and what we do is we increase the number of dice you roll, or we remove the amount of dice you roll. Now the benefit of this is if we have a 1 to 6 kind of stat line, or even a 1 to 8 stat line, we are not limiting ourselves to just that kind of 8 places or those 6 places on the stat. We can keep adding dice, or we can keep removing dice to enable us to have a wider spread of power options, shall we say. It's a fantastic way to show that somebody is getting stronger without totally overpowering them and making the model broken. Or it's a great way to show that something is becoming weaker without basically making it nigh on impossible to be able to achieve what you're trying to do. But for me, the biggest component of this is the stat lines never change. I can start to remember the stat lines, and I don't have to do that mental maths of, well, it was a 4+, but now he's kind of out of range, so it's a 5+, but he's got this weapon, so he's gone back to a 4+, and he's got this upgrade, so he comes down to a 3. All of that stuff just goes out of the window. I just remember this model always hits on a 4+, for example, and then I basically get to pick up my amount of dice that I need and just roll them. As I said before, this happens in quite a few games like Marvel Crisis Protocol, Dead Zone, Firefight, God Tier, and by keeping that fixed stat line and moving the amount of dice we roll, I think it also helps to balance the game long term as well, because we're not shifting a stat that then has a knock-on effect to lots of different things. What we're doing is we're just changing the amount of dice that we're rolling. Now the fifth and final one is from Star Wars Legion, and it's move your leader model and everybody else just follows along. Now again, this is not just used in Star Wars Legion, it's also used in Firefight by Mantic Games, but until you've played this, you won't realise just how much it speeds up a game. For those that don't know, in Star Wars Legion, you move your models based upon a template. And what you can do is you place that template in front of your unit's leader model, you move the leader to where you want it to go, and then basically you just pick up the rest of the units and just move them to the side of that leader model as long as they're within a distance of coherency. Now this really does speed up the game because you're not having to measure for every single model and checking ranges from every single model. When it comes to things like shooting, you measure from your leader model. Everything just becomes so much more simple and so much faster. As I mentioned at the start, there are so many amazing miniatures games out there and they all have some fantastic mechanics. And I'm sure you have some favourites of your own as well. Why not let me know down in the comments so I can have a look at them and see if there are any that I've maybe overlooked or maybe some that I'm not even aware of. Even if you only play one game, I urge you to take a demo of something else just to see what else is out there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.